What's up, team? Good to see you. Hey, my name's Landon, and I'm one of the high school pastors here, and I want to just give you two things before we start. Number one, thank you so much for being here. Like, we know there are a million different places you could probably be, so thank you for giving an hour and a half when you could be anywhere else. At least it's 90 minutes without homework. All right, second thing, because I've sat at house groups and watched, sometimes because we're meeting outdoors, like it's really difficult to pay attention to these, really. Like you, okay? The dudes in the back laughing. Not you, the guy next to you. Yeah, right now. Okay, they just realized I'm talking to them. Yeah, you have something on your shirt. You. Okay, I'm kidding. You look great. But you're wearing a mask and you're watching on a phone or an outdoor TV, and sometimes it's hard to pay attention. So I just want to say thank you for leaning in, and these moments have the potential to be so impactful. So thank you so much. Okay, a quick story to start. When I lived in Arizona, I was an intern at a church, and I wanted to learn leadership. And through some crazy circumstances, somebody else introduced me to Doug. Now, Doug was the CEO of a large company, and Doug agreed to go to lunch once a month for the next year. And I simply just asked questions and learned from his wealth of knowledge. Now, why do I tell you that? Spoiler alert, okay? It will come up later. But before we start, a question to break the ice. If you could have lunch with anyone, just like I did with Doug, who would it be, and where would you go? Take a minute to talk to those around you. All right, come back this way. Okay, try to put your phones away. Love you. But there's a chance your fantasy football team is not winning, like mine probably isn't. And Instagram, Snap, TikTok will still be there in a few minutes when we're done. Okay, so here's what I learned about Doug. He started as a 16-year-old kid working in the factory, picking up after the guard dogs gross, and now he's the CEO on the phone with Japan on the way to our lunch in the United Kingdom office on the way back to work. He knows famous people. He drove a baller car, practically swam in dollar bills, and yet he took time to have lunch with me, a 20-year-old intern. Why? He had nothing to gain from our lunch, right? So why would he do it? It's very simple. Doug was humble. Okay, he practiced humility. Oxford Dictionary defines humility as a modest or low view of one's own self-importance. And normally, I don't disagree with the dictionary, but I'm going to disagree here. It's controversial, I know. Okay, here's why. Ready? That definition paints the word humility that we're going to focus on tonight with a negative connotation. That humility is synonymous with a low standing in society or a lack of success or loss or a low view of one's self-importance. That's like head hung low, aw shucks, guess I'll never get there type of thinking. And that wasn't Doug at all. Like, he didn't have a low view of self-importance. That definition, well, it couldn't even get past his job title. So a question for you, is it possible in today's culture to be both humble and important? Is it possible to be humble and important? And regardless of if you believe it, Jesus was important and he was humble. So he would fail that definition too. I mean, think about it. He was capable of anything. He could work miracles with his hands, and he knew what was going to happen before it happened. Okay, he could have amassed any type of wealth. He was the great I am, which is a Bible way of saying, I'm that dude, right? I'm the one, I'm in charge, and yet he chose to be a carpenter, to be homeless, paid attention to social outcasts, and most ignored. And eventually, he gave himself over to the Romans to be crucified, even though he could have wiped them out like Thanos with the Infinity Stones. The Apostle Paul, who we've talked about before, describes Jesus this way, who being in very nature God, which means, aka he could do anything, did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the very form of a servant, which means if he was alive today, he wouldn't use his knowledge to manipulate the stock market, but he made himself nothing by, again, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness and being found in human form. Okay, he looked like us. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. He was God in a bod, and he was humble. And it's not because he wasn't important, and it's not because he had a low view or a bad self-image. James, Jesus' brother, well, he watched him grow up. He watched him learn how to do miracles, and I can't imagine being Jesus' brother, right? He watched him become famous, more famous than anybody on the planet then, and even more famous than anybody else now. And yet Jesus was humble, which means humility is a choice. You know, tonight I want to look at 10 words written by James, Jesus' brother, who saw Jesus make the choice to be humble. And he just says this right here, James 4:10, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. Which you read, it's one of those things you read and you go, great, like why should I do that and what does that mean? Well, thank you for asking, okay? Why? It's really simple, and I don't know you that much, but just from my life experience, if you're humble, you probably won't be empty inside. And because the rest of the world will notice, because the rest of the world will wonder why. But like, what does humility and humbling yourself before the Lord, like what does that even mean? Well, there's a quote from a guy named C.S. Lewis that I really like, and it's just, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Like humility isn't a call to a bad self-image, but instead understanding that the world is bigger than us, that the world is more than the number of followers, that the world is more than how many people know our name. That stuff can be self-serving. Like it's, I got to win first all the time. It's me thinking, and that can be exhausting. Right? How many times do we have to see celebrities and athletes and famous people say, look, I know you guys think that like I'm on top of the world, but it's not enough. I'm still empty. I'm not happy. So maybe that's why Doug had lunch with me. Because like innately we recognize that there's something better than a me first life. And humility, ironically, can give you a greater platform than self-promotion, right? If you think about it, right? Like humbling yourself before the Lord is simply recognizing that God is pleased when we say, look, I'll serve. My life is more about me, and oftentimes God will open up doors for you once you say that and you live that. It's not thinking of yourself less. It's thinking less often about me and more often about them. So when it comes to like friendships and relationships, real ones choose humility over pride. They choose them over me. When I was in college, I really wanted to become a pastor, a great speaker, hopefully. And there was a guy named Ben Stewart who I really loved, and I still do. And he was a pastor and somebody I really looked up to. And I took Ben to coffee, kind of like I had lunch with Doug. And I asked him to mentor me. And I thought he was just going to say, absolutely, I love your initiative. Of course, I'll mentor you. And he said no. And I was crushed. And I asked him, why? Like, I had this plan. I want to be like you. I like what you do. Can you show me? And Ben looked at me and he said, Landon, everything you've said so far is about you. How do I become a better speaker, a better leader, a better whatever? Thinking way too much about you. You got to serve first, man. Make it about others. And truthfully, I was ticked. But I listened. And I went to a church and I got a job as a janitor. It was my first job at a church. And instead of speaking to people in chairs, I set up chairs. Instead of being up front, I was in the back. And I didn't leave that experience with a low self-image. Actually, it was the opposite. I left an understanding, like the second half of that verse, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. When I humbled myself, I understood that the world was bigger than me. I saw that God was just as pleased with the dude who sets up chairs as he is with the person who stands up front. And it made me better as a result. And now, I get to do this. It's pretty cool. So this week, my question to you is, how can you serve those around you? Like, how can you humble yourself and do something for somebody else? It's not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. Thanks for coming today. We'll see you next week.